Hello there, welcome back to Nerd World Empire. And remember, greed is good. Say it with me, greed is good. Today we're discussing the Grand Nagus, the position of the leader of the Ferengi Alliance, the most ruthless, the most intelligent, the most powerful of all the men of the Ferengi Alliance. A man responsible for the greed and financial fortunes of billions of Ferengi, not just himself. Before we get started, please like, share, subscribe, and comment down below. So before we get started, what is a Grand Nagus? In fact, what's a Nagus? A Nagus, as far as we can tell, is one of, if not the, leader of the Ferengi Alliance. Whether there are other Naguses other than the Grand Nagus, not entirely sure, although I would assume there are, as you have a title of Grand Nagus. The Ferengi have alternative names for different positions and oligarchs within their society, such as a daemon being a captain, thing like that. Translation doesn't seem to do it justice, I imagine. You got the Grand Nagus, the most famous of which was the Grand Nagus Zek. We actually only really know about two Naguses, or at least we only ever really see two Grand Naguses of the Ferengi Alliance. Others are occasionally referenced, and there's sort of pretensions to others, like when Quark thinks he becomes Nagus. But actually, in fact, only two are ever seen. Zek and Rom. Two very different individuals with two very different philosophical outlooks on the Ferengi Alliance. But before we get to talking about those two Ferengi, let's discuss the office itself. The Grand Nagus, as the leader of the Ferengi Alliance, as stated, he was the financial leader of the Ferengi society. He was meant to be not just the leader of the Ferengi, but also their guide and their fountain of wisdom. He wasn't just meant to be respective of himself like other Ferengi. He was actually meant to be almost altruistic is the wrong word, but he was meant to be, oh god, what is the right word? I mean, Ferengi are kind of morally bankrupt. His greed was meant to represent the greed of all Ferengi. Greed is good, not just his own. In other words, his actions were meant to lead the Ferengi to greater prosperity and power, not just lead himself to greater prosperity and power. In other words, his actions, because they affected others, must be seen and actively beneficial to other Ferengi, as other Ferengi would seek an audience with him for advice, something they would have to literally pay for with a slip of gold-pressed latinum. This was conducted at the Tower of Commerce on Ferenginar, presumably in their capital, and it was the Chamber of Opportunity, where he would sit on what was the Ferengi equivalent to some kind of royal throne to meet with dignitaries and representatives of Ferengi business ventures, and maybe even some other non-Ferengi individuals who were willing to pay for his services. He would be, of course, surrounded by staff and people who worked there, and they would the clerks and other people worked as a filter, making sure that only the right people got to see the Nagus, and they got all the files and information to him. Basically, before you get to see him, you get to see why you were there, so the information could be taken to the Nagus, so he could think about it and give you real feedback, not just off the top of his head information. The Grand Nagus's power was ultimately backed, like with any government, it needed to have people supporting it, by the Ferengi Bill of Opportunities and support of the liquidators, such as well, Liquidator Brunt, FCA. So now we have an understanding of who and what the Ferengi Grand Nagus is. Now we have to question, what do they do? I mean, really. So to understand what a Grand Nagus did, we can only really look to the two examples of a Nagus we have. We know that a Nagus, of course, as previously stated, was the financial heart as well as spirit of the Ferengi Alliance. Their greed set the gold standard, or gold-pressed latinum standard, for all other Ferengi in the Ferengi Alliance. Greed is good. He was able to change laws, make amendments to the Ferengi rules of acquisition. He also, as I said, dished out advice, as well as would sit atop his own financial empire, his own corporate pyramid, of which he was meant to be the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest, one of the wealthiest Ferengi alive. and his greed, as I said, was meant to set the gold standard. Now, Nagus Zek clearly met this criteria. As far as we know, once you are a Grand Nagus, you pretty much stay there until you are deemed mentally or physically incapable of doing the job, or you choose to relinquish that position yourself. It's not, as I've said, they're a corporatocracy, not a democracy. So once you're a Grand Nagus, you just are the Grand Nagus. The Grand Nagus also is somewhat responsible, and possibly primarily responsible, for the Ferengi's diplomatic contact with other races. Now, of course, many other Ferengi, as representatives of different bodies of Ferengi and government of some description, handle this on a day-to-day basis. First contact and new business opportunities with new races. A bit like, unlike the Federation, that see first contact with a new race as an opportunity to learn and grow and just get to know each other, and maybe lead to trade deals and things later down the road, because those are all beneficial to everyone. The Ferengi just see everything as a new reason to exploit, a new race that they can trade with, a new business venture, a new financial opportunity. Greed is good, and the Ferengi Grand Nagus encourages this. Zek spearheaded Ferengi interests in the Gamma Quadrant, even attempting strongly to create overtures to the Dominion, the Ferengi being one of the few peoples who were able to establish any kind of trade with the Dominion before the Dominion War, and even maintain a relatively stable relationship with both sides of that conflict during the war, although the Nagus and the Ferengi alliance overall certainly lent towards sympathies of the Federation, as the Ferengi overall are against war. Limited little wars, fine, they'll sell to both sides, make money. Big wars that threaten the sovereignty of the Ferengi people are a little bit more suspicious to them. The Nagus, of course, though, was not against trading with such hostile powers of the Dominion. As long as they weren't planning to invade Ferenginar and the Ferengi be left alone to do their thing, they were quite happy to deal with them. We also see the Nagus is able to affect cultural changes within the Ferengi. Now we see this with both Rom and Zek. Zek began a relationship with Rom's mother. Rom's mother was a financially astute individual, highly intelligent, well educated by Ferengi female standards, and extremely capable and confident, and she taught Zek that Ferengi females had opportunity. He also learned early on, although he was generally chauvinistic like many Ferengi at first, he realized that there was an entire financial market right on their own doorstep the Ferengi have been ignoring for generations: the women. The men bought things for the women, jewelry and things for the house or whatever, but the women themselves had their hands in their husbands' purses, in their father's purses, in their brothers' purses, and up until now they've been having to make them buy them things. But if they were able to earn a little bit of money, it would double the Ferengi economy and open up an entire new market without having to go beyond their own borders. Basically, they could double their own economy and double their own financial interests, and as well as create entire new financial industries which would allow for greater export and other things, just by giving the women equality, or at least some measure of it, of independence. Zek recognized this in his dealing with Ishtar, and as a result, the first baby steps towards Ferengi females having more autonomy were taken. Under Rom, this will be expanded even further. Rom allowed his wife, who was a non-Ferengi, to wear clothes at their wedding. She was allowed to talk to others. He never tried to impose his will upon her, and he would go on to be a more lenient and more passive leader of the Ferengi people. However, with Ferengi culture, he still was probably having to walk something of a tentative line, but the steps put in place by Zek, who was always there with his mother to help him, did mean that he was able to push the Ferengi people even further down this road to modernization of their culture. Greed is good. Now this is all that we see of what the Ferengi Naguses immediately do, but how do they operate as well? Unlike other Ferengi who would operate larger warships such as the Marauders, the Decora class vessels, Zek preferred only to operate a shuttle, or a small fleet of shuttles maybe. He had them, his own personal one was a large, heavily customized luxury shuttle, but it was still only a shuttle. This was because he was not a trader. He used others to do the dirty work. This is what he tried to teach Quark. You don't need a big starship to haul loads of cargo yourself. You get some other idiot to do that and just give them a token amount of profit. All he needed was a ship to get him from A to B. Now, of course, with his wealth, he could have operated a bigger ship, and he probably had access to them, being the Grand Nagus, if he really wanted to, but he didn't need to own it himself. So he looked to cut costs and cut corners as much as possible while maximizing profit, and he recognized that he simply didn't need a larger vessel to do this. This is a cutthroat sort of method we see in many Walmart got Tourette's, sorry, industries on Earth, allegedly, who often cut corners, allegedly, and sacrifice other aspects of their business, such as wages and ethics, allegedly, in order to prop up financial profits. Of course, we're talking about a fictional universe version of Walmart, of course, here. But the Ferengi Grand Nagus is basically like that, or like Donald Trump, allegedly, in this fictional Star Trek universe. Not in this universe, allegedly. Now, a Nagus overall is the leader of the Ferengi people. He gets to make all the big decisions, and all the other Ferengi follow his advice and his lead. And that's basically the office of the Nagus. In his spare time, he would indulge in his luxury palaces, luxury goods, everything his heart could ever desire, sometimes without even having to pay for it, because that's, you know, wealth begets more wealth, even amongst the Ferengi. And yeah, his main job, though, was to inspire other Ferengi to earn more profit and better themselves in the Ferengi way, as greed, ruthlessness, and being rather cutthroat and selfish was seen as positive traits amongst the Ferengi. Greed is good, whereas amongst humans or Klingons they were seen as deplorable character traits and flaws, but amongst the Ferengi they were seen as strengths. This led to this corporatocracy we see of the Ferengi Alliance, which could be belligerent, hostile, but ultimately war is not good for business unless you're selling weapons to the other guy. And that is basically the ins and outs of a Nagus. Their symbol of power is usually a staff, which other Ferengi have to kiss in the presence of the Nagus, and yeah, they can pretty much do as they please, within reason, as long as they don't do anything batshit insane, like change the entire Ferengi rules of acquisition to make them nice and altruistic, in which case they can be mentally removed and maybe even executed for such stupidity. So, you know, there is a fine line they're walking. But the rewards. Greed is good.
I just want to take this moment to thank you for watching that video. If you liked what you saw, please check out my social links in the description box below to Instagram and Twitter and others, and also is down there a link to my Patreon page where you can support this channel and the others as I try to grow this franchise and do this more regularly. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you for watching, and bye bye.